Hello and welcome to India Speak, a podcast by the Center for Policy Research. I'm Rohan Venkat. You're listening to CPR Perspectives, a special series commemorating CPR's 50th anniversary, where we bring you one flagship conversation with a CPR faculty member every month. This month, we speak to Shyam Babu, a senior fellow at CPR who has, over the years, worked on subjects as varied as nuclear non-proliferation and national security, as well as socio-economic mobility among Dalits and the impact of liberalization on social justice. He is co-author of Defying the Odds, a critically acclaimed book that profiled the rise of Dalit entrepreneurs, taking forward the insights developed through a number of key socio-economic surveys that set out to map social change. I spoke to Shyam Babu about working across very different academic fields, what he learned from being in the field, why it's important to look beyond the straightforward narratives of social justice, and his experience of workshops conducted by CPR aimed at giving a leg up to scholars from scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities. All right, great. Thank you so much for being on CPR Perspectives. I start usually with getting a sense of how you entered the policy world. So I'd like to get a sense of your journey. Tell me a little bit about how you entered this world, in your early years as a student and then a scholar. What brought you into the policy space?
Well, Rahul, thank you very much for inviting me. I entered this building, Center for Policy Research, in 1989. At the time, I was a student in Jawaharlal Nehru University, pursuing my MPhil PhD program and disarmament studies. So my professor happened to be a friend of Professor Babu, who was a professor at JNU itself earlier. Then he moved to CPR. So when he came to give a talk in JNU, he asked my professor that he wanted a young boy to help him with his book as a research assistant. So I happened to be next to both of them. Then my professor T.T. Paulos, he turned to me and said, "Shyam, why don't you go?" That's how I came to CPR in 1989. So my initial stint in CPR was very brief. Actually, I shouldn't say CPR because the salary I received as a research assistant did not come from CPR. It came from the publisher who published that book. It's about Rajiv Gandhi, a political biography written by Professor Babu. But I was coming to CPR regular to meet him and give the material and whatever he wanted me to do, I did. As I said, my initial formal association with Professor Babu and CPR was very brief, but very soon, we became very good friends. I was almost like a family member at Professor Babu's residence. I would go there. And as he continued here, he retired from CPR somewhere in mid-90s, about 96, 97-ish. So because of that association, I was coming to CPR once in a while. So that's how I entered CPR first.
And tell me a bit about your broader thinking at the time. Did you know for sure that you wanted to go into this academic policy world? Was it something that you were hoping to do? Like, what was your own thinking in terms of a career at the time?
Rohan, probably by 1989, you are nowhere here on this planet. I don't know how far you can relate to the world of 1980s before internet and all this on television. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I was in JNU, which is politically a very conscious place, with at that time, all the information, knowledge, wisdom we were receiving from the newspapers and news magazines. All India Radio was there, even Doordarshan was there, but since they are government entities, we never took them seriously. So my fascination with CPR was that he a student of international relations. I was reading the same people who were working in CPR. Like the regular newspapers, Times of India, the Hindu, news magazines, EPW. These are the places CPR faculty was using to reach a wider audience like me. So it was really exciting that the person the scholar I was reading happened to come to CPR, and I could meet him, and he asked me to come and join him as a assistant. It was quite something. The newspapers, the kind of importance they had now, it's very difficult to understand in the current circumstances.
And in terms of your focus then on nuclear issues at the time, can you tell me how you ended up looking at this? What made you choose international relations? What gave you sort of an into studying these things early on?
Well, I was a student of political science in BA and MA, and the international studies certainly fascinated me. I also had this habit of writing newspaper articles from a very early age. So my intermediate days, I started writing op-eds here, originally in Telugu, in newspapers, and I was covering both domestic issues and foreign relations to the extent I can understand and reflect. Ron, you should remember that newspaper articles are written by two kinds of people. One are experts, like say foreign secretary or a diplomat of a particular country. He would comment on a particular event or a policy that he knows very much. The other is informed opinion. You know enough to form an opinion. It is an informed opinion, may not be an expert opinion. So at early age, I could understand the difference, so that when I was writing an IR, then I applied for JDO, MPhil PhD program, and I got into development studies. Then, because my professor was interested in the nuclear non-proliferation, so he said, why not you do your MPhil on that? And I unfortunately couldn't finish my PhD, but it was also related to regional arms control in South Asia.
Okay, and could you then tell us a little bit about what followed? I know you then spent some time as a journalist before. And focusing on, as you said, national and international issues before then making your way back into sort of the policy space at the Rajiv Gandhi Institute. So if you could tell us a little bit about that arc of that period of time.
Well, what happened is 88 to 89, I did my MPhil work on the nuclear non-proliferation. So in 1989, I came in contact with Professor Babu, as I mentioned. So after finishing my MPhil dissertation, submitting it, I showed him it. He looked at it and I said that, why did you publish it? I didn't ask my publisher to publish it, so just revise it. So I took more than a year revising it. Then I published it. I think ultimately came out somewhere in 91. So when I came to JNU in 1986, I had enough English vocabulary. I could read a book and understand. But both written and spoken English was very, very rudimentary. So I took about three and a half to 4 years to brush up my English to such an extent where I could start writing in newspaper articles. So that's what happened by early 90s. I started writing in English, and I published my dissertation as a book. And from Professor Babu in 1992, I came in touch with Professor Stephen Cohen, who was at the University of Illinois. He had a very vibrant security program at the university. So he read my book, and through Babu Gupta, I went to him. Then he invited me to spend a year with him at Illinois, which I did. So in all this process, what happened, one, spending my time wisely on my PhD dissertation, I spent that time and energy in revising my MPhil dissertation to publish. So in a way, I lost steam, and the second time also I lost. So I spent 1 year in Illinois and I came back. Then I became a journalist for a few years, about 10 years. So early in the 90s, I joined this Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Contemporary Studies. Again, I there also spent about a decade. Then I moved on to CPR. And meanwhile, also I was writing my commentaries in newspapers and publications like economic and political. So that's broadly is my trajectory.
If I'm not incorrect, at one point you considered entering the services as well.
Yeah. For my generation, not appearing for the UPSC exam means you're some kind of a weird personality. So even though I was always clear, I would be in a space where I would be spending my time reading and writing. Reading I did quite well, but probably writing not as much as I would have loved. So I appeared for the UPSC exam and I got selected. I got into Indian Revenue Service, but I decided not to do it. So that is the year also, Professor Cohen invited me to spend time with him at University of Kerala as a distinguished scholar. So I got the service, but never joined. I never reported for duty.
And then as you then move out of then being, those years in journalism, you enter the Rajiv Gandhi Institute. And my understanding is that your focuses start to shift. You had been until then focused on, writing about all sorts of things as a journalist, but in your academic career focused on national security, on nuclear non-proliferation and so on. Could you tell me a little bit about, as you entered the Rajiv Gandhi Institute, what you came in to do and how that shifted over time?
Oh, yes. What happened for a decade, I was working on national security and international relations. That is up to early 2000s. So with a couple of my friends, we got an opportunity. I did a lot of activism also during my JNU days. I was very much there when Mandal Commission was announced and all the agitation. So because of that activism, as a kind of Dalit activism we did, a couple of friends, we got an opportunity from Madhya Pradesh University Chief Minister. So he asked us, why don't you tell us what kind of policies are needed to uplift Dalits and tribal people? And, he had this very nice policy of reaching out to each segment of population and finding right people and carrying out a dialogue, an extensive dialogue, and leading to a good conference or a committee. The committee means several people come together, a policy framework for the government to implement. So when it comes to the interests of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, are what you call Dalits and tribals, we were asked to do the same thing. So in 1992, we did a huge conference in Bhopal. It was called, known as a Bhopal Conference of Dalit intellectuals, activists, and academics. Throughout the country, more than 600-700 people came. So we all deliberated. It's a huge thing. And I also published on that. Professor Sudhapa actually wrote a whole book on experience. We did give several suggestions, and actually, Mr. Vijay Singh, to his credit, he implemented many of them. Unfortunately, the very next year, he lost power. So after that, that process was never seriously taken by subsequent governments there. So with that, I started a shift, moved away from IR and started working on social justice topics from Mobile Conference onwards, 2002. So the same year I joined the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. There also most of my work was related to this. In a way, for almost a couple of decades, I spent most of my time on matters related to social justice. We did two very significant projects. From the beginning, I was lucky and really blessed to have wonderful teachers and mentors, Professor T.T. Polas, Professor Babani Sen Gupta, and Professor Stephen Cohen, and also I have excellent friends Mr. Chandraban Prasad, and Dr. Devesh Kapoor, and Pratap Bandamata, and so many others really helped me. So we did two projects. One is by mid 2000s, we realized economic reforms by the time completed a whole generation. And we see several positive changes even among the lives of adults. So we wanted to measure what kind of positive impact or negative impact these economic reforms had on the community. So we had a very big project to two whole blocks in Uttar Pradesh, which we published as a EPW paper, reporting that economic reforms had transformed social conditions in the countryside, at least in the two blocks we studied. And we also indicated that it's a general trend in most of Hindi. And subsequent to that, we also came up with this very rough hypothesis that in the past 50 years also, through affirmative action and through other means, they could have formed a Dalit bourgeoisie who had some money, and as a result of economic reforms, public sector was shrinking. Earlier, those few Dalits who had education could get government jobs. Now, in 2000s, that was not the case. There were more and more educated people and less government jobs. And the number of jobs was actually shrinking. So we thought it was possible that because a couple of generations of affirmative action beneficiaries are in the system and their children might have been well educated and endowed with some resources, not necessarily a lot of money, and there are not many government jobs. Obviously, they wouldn't sit at home. They would do something. It could be possible that many of them might be becoming entrepreneurs. With that rough hypothesis, we wanted to go into the field and find them because government had no data. And the way we did it is, anecdotally, we find one or two Dalits who are in some kind of business doing well. They become rich. Places like Pune or Faridabad, Jalandhar, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, all these places, Lucknow. In all these places, we found some. So we would go to one and try to get his trajectory and ask him whether he knew anybody else similar to him who succeeded in entrepreneurship. So that's how we could track literally a few hundred. And in 2014, we selected about 19 or 20 entrepreneurs, and we published a very popular book, Defining the Arts. It was received quite well.
And both of those projects are super interesting. And we'll come back to dig in a little bit more into how you went about it and what you found. But maybe just before we dig into those, one question that comes to mind is that often the academic world can be quite siloed. Things are quite separate. And in a sense, these two focuses of yours, the social justice side, let's say, and then the national security, nuclear non-proliferation, and so are quite far apart. And I know in more recent years, you've published a chapter in a book, sort of maybe combining the two a little bit. But I wanted to know, at the time, did you find it hard to go back and forth between thinking about IR and thinking about questions on this side of things, or was it natural? Did you make an active choice, or was it just in terms of the opportunities that came up?
Frankly, to begin with, it was opportunities that came in my way. I took them. But much later, I realized that I did not take a U-turn. In a way, I made my intellectual enterprise much more broad, much more curious, because if you are doing social justice in India, you can take gender, you can take class, or you can take caste. They're not mutually exclusive. Sometimes all three would be in one category. But even in areas of, say, national security, caste matters a lot. That's the point I was arguing in my latest paper, which you just mentioned. So, to that extent, my intellectual concerns did not change much. So, from the very beginning, I was bothered by this phenomenon called caste and its deleterious effects, not just on its victims, like the lower caste and dalites, and everybody else. As long as Rohan, you and me think that a particular problem is not our problem, we have no reason to attend to that. The things like say corruption. In many other countries, for example, they talk in terms of taxpayers' money. If a project is not done well, if a footpath is not built well, people say you wasted taxpayers' money. But in India, we don't have that concept. With the result, when we see a badly done public work, we may say, oh, waste of public money, but you don't really connect. So that is the problem with caste. Most people tend to feel that it is somebody else's problem. But my point is, it's not just somebody else's problem. The whole system is affected by it, like the way corruption. You can't simply say, oh, corruption is there, but we are all victims of that. So in my latest paper, I was arguing the same point. Even in terms of national security, why is it that India, it's a rich history and civilizational pedigree, doesn't have a coherent national security policy or an aspiration? What does it want outside its borders? What are its strategic aims in the terms of what do you want to be like after a couple of decades? 2040 or 2050, where do you want to go? The latest example of a great power actually doing it is China. From 1978 onwards, at every time they were asking questions and setting the deadlines and roadmap, and they have come here. They haven't drifted to the current positions just like that. It was a very conscious policy. There are 4 modernizations, for example. They decided by early 80s, these are the areas we are weak. So China must focus on these areas in a time-bound manner to accomplish certain goals. We haven't done that. Why? Probably people say it's because of corruption, incompetence, or the ruling party is not interested, or politicians are not interested. I do accept all of them. I would say they are always symptoms. Their real cause is caste. Caste would divide you. It would make you think very small. That affects your national security. For example, when Ambedkar cited Metcalf to say that every time an invader came, Indian villages didn't really bother because they didn't see themselves as a nation. Whoever was there in Delhi or whatever is the capital, whatever might have been the capital, they were paying taxes. So they never bothered who was ruling them. Most national leaders did not accept that. They were insisting always that no, we are politically all the time. So I see all these different strands as one affected by caste. So whether it is like work on social justice issues, affirmative action, so many interesting, don't even want to remember that. But everywhere, the real issue is caste. So to that extent, I have never really deviated from that.
Yeah, for the listener, we're referring to a paper called A Journey Without a Destination, The Cultural Economy of a Great Power, which appears in a book called How Realist is India's National Security Policy, which was published earlier this year. What, especially as you go back and forth between these two worlds, or in a sense, At least because maybe in your thinking, it's not necessarily separate, but obviously in the academic world, you point out that scholars in the IR space don't think of these social or cultural issues. They tend not to integrate that into their broader ideas of the world. So, is it a challenge to make an argument like this, to work in the IR space and say that we need to pay more attention to these sort of issues that in the academy are like kept in the sociology or the anthropology or those other spaces?
Absolutely. Because, Rohan, IR, international relations, is not a standalone subject like economics or anthropology or sociology. It stands on the shoulders of other social sciences. Somebody to say that I'm an IR scholar, but I don't really care sociology or social aspects of the country or economic aspects or geography is not correct. You can't be an IR specialist if you have no ground in Indian society. I'm not just talking about India, be it Italy or Canada and US. If you are not thorough with the social forces or economy, when you think of a nation and its standing or its foreign policy or security policy, what we must look first is the so-called lay of the land. What are its capabilities? What are its vulnerabilities? For example, Ron, in a very simplistic way, I would argue that I want to become a Wimbledon champion. I want to be playing for India in Davis Cup. You might want to know my age, my physical condition, how much I trained, did I really qualify in any domestic tennis matches, all that matters. So similarly, how a nation can position itself depends not so much on the declaratory process of its leaders, but its economy. Can Indian economy underwrite our aspirations? Question one. Have we spent in terms of our national defense to ward off external aggression? Do we have sufficient industrial capacity, domestic industrial capacity, to provide equipment for war efforts? Do we have social cohesion, like the way Ukrainians have been demonstrating? When we are at war or when we are at war, whether we as Indians come together and work for that war effort. Any major war you take, Second World War, most countries acted as one, both allied and Axis powers. These are the questions our IR scholars should be asking themselves and answer there. And if they just talk about only IR, talk about the foreign relations, how many times our foreign minister visited other country, what are the joint communique they issued, they are fine, they are important. But these are the kind of dynamics we need to look into. IR is not a standalone academic subject. I think that's the reason most universities don't teach you IR at undergrad level. Am I right?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I'm curious. Then, given your arc of involvement with this from the late 80s onwards, do you see among either Indian scholars or scholars working on India in the IR space or in some of these interdisciplinary spaces, do you see a bigger recognition of this? Do you feel like the academy has gotten better at taking on these subjects and looking at it from different lenses, or do you think there's much more that needs to be done?
Outside, there is no problem. They cover the kind of concerns I just expressed in civil military relations, for example. Even countries where, most of the countries don't have caste system. So it's not about just caste system. You have social aspects to your existence. There are economic aspects, your industrial base, your population. Is your population just monolingual? Is it multilingual? What are the social cleavages you have? all these things matter to your national security. This is a kind of outside these aspects are not ignored. It's a bane of India that our scholars, especially IR scholars, have ignored these factors. A few scholars who focus on caste and other aspects happen to be farmers. My Guru's Chief Cohen mentioned about how caste and communal feelings were creeping into British Indian Army by late 19th century. Our scholars must have taken off from there to see how these things are happening now. What is the impact of caste or communal issues in army, or police forces, for example? Or what about our economy? How much our economy can actually support militarization? Militarization doesn't have to be negative all the time, because the kind of threats we face, we must be having a much bigger army, having much bigger military industrial complex to produce the weaponry for our own use and also for export. Those things are not happening because we are not focusing on that. We are not even articulating demands. These are our needs. We are not saying that.
All right. So if we can maybe then come to some of the research that you mentioned earlier and your work on social justice, covering things like sociology, economics, anthropology, and so on. One of the threads I seem to notice in the work that you subsequently did on the question of caste was often a way to debunk certain ways of thinking of India's caste problems, even for those who are ostensibly anti-caste. So, for example, in 2006, you had a paper that noted that although, yes, violence against Dalits seemed to be going up, the evidence almost suggested that it is because of social mobility within Dalit spaces that is increasing the number of atrocities. Again, the fieldwork in Uttar Pradesh, which the paper that came out in 2010, shows that there have been quite big changes to the lives of Dalits after liberalization, which is not necessarily captured in the way we talk about inequality increasing after liberalization. So if I could get a sense of, your approach also to these issues as you started to write and think more about questions of social justice.
Absolutely. My position, Rohan, is that caste is a reality. Any social marker is going to stay. We are not going to erase race. We are not going to erase gender or class or caste. What is the problem with all these markers is they tend to be too oppressive. The trick those who are in the policy sphere is, while recognizing, say, caste as a reality, what are you going to do about reducing or rubbing off its rough edges? So I put my entire work in that mode. It's not so much about anti-caste or the kind of policy regions. Rohan, one of the biggest factors that has reduced caste inequalities or caste oppression, pure and simple good governance, rule of law. We haven't been perfect, but certainly past several decades, our governance has been robust enough to help the poor and marginalized. They could go to proper institutions of redressal like police or courts, and they can fight in the courts for their rights. So these factors we don't really give credit to. They all work. The second is, in addition to the good governance thought, actually I should not say good governance, just pure and simple governance. Because we have a very good constitution, we have IPC, we have CRPC, basically stipulating how we should manage our criminal justice system. With all the failures, still it succeeded in creating environment that is conducive for the Dalits and tribals to claim their rights. So over and above that, you can have some remedial measures like, say, affirmative action, or special treatment, or giving more scholarships. Those are the kind of things we should do to reduce these disparities and inequalities. As you mentioned, my paper of 2006, what we found is it is not the poorest of the poor among the community, but those who are sufficiently well off and upwardly mobile were being targeted. So it's a naturally society's response when an oppressed group starts claiming its rights. Then you see the backlash. You have seen the same phenomenon in the United States. After the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation by President Lincoln, then the lynching started in a major way. So in a society's trajectory, these things happen. But we as scholars, we should have a balance in terms of, are we going to do anything more radical? In terms of, you come up with some solutions which would really exacerbate problem.
To dig into that a bit more, even for you as a researcher who's been focused on this for a little while, my sense is that some of the things that you managed to discover, both in doing the fieldwork in UP, and then when putting together Defying the Odds, which is the book on the entrepreneurial class among Dalits, that some things jumped out to you as being more striking examples of this. So I want to know what your own experience was of working on these projects also, and actually seeing out in the field things that you may have thought about more, like in terms of a hypothesis beforehand.
Yeah, it was interesting. Two really positive social changes I could report, thanks to my friends, both Chandraban and Devesh, had nothing to do with the state intervention in terms of helping Dalits and tribals. Economic reforms, let us say, introduced in 1991, and did not have any component of social justice. Actually, that happened to be one of the core criticisms of economic reforms. They completely ignored social dynamics of inequality, poverty, and all that. That being a legitimate criticism, what I want to tell you is, through our work, we found that even though economic reforms were never intended or designed to produce positive social change, they end up producing this positive social change. Coupled with somewhat rule-based liberal governance, because of economic reforms, and you started from almost a very low base, a little bit economic activity in urban centers meant that Dalits and other poor groups could find employment opportunities in cities. And interestingly, those areas where caste discrimination was not such a big deal, not many Dalits moved. The areas which we studied, like Uttar Pradesh, where the feudal system was and is strong, oppression was very intense. Dalits started moving out into cities, creating labor shortage in villages. There are so many from each village, able-bodied men were leaving for work in cities. It created labor shortage, and labor shortage within one generation brought about so much social change. I try to put it as briefly as I can. Most able-bodied men, or most men, from a village, moved to cities. They were in cities as construction workers, maybe rickshaw pullers, whatever they were doing, forget it. But at least they created labor shortage in villages. How would landlords handle this? Nobody else was coming to work. There was no migrant labor coming. So initially they thought that technology would fix it. So many of them, when we think of a landlord, you have this one image of a man having hundreds of acres and he has his own car or tractor. He will be doing usually all kinds of things. But if you go to the field, you find the so-called landlords happen to be small and marginal farmers with maybe few acres of land. And they don't have labor to work in their lands. So many of them took bank loans to buy tractors. They thought that they could buy tractors and replace the human labor. It didn't work so simply because one, tractor was expensive and they bought it taking a bank loan. And in a year, they could hardly use their tractor for maybe a week or 10 days to work in their own fields. What do you do with the rest of the year? One, how are you going to pay the EMIs every month? Then they started employing tractor drivers to go and work in other fields. Many found it is not really economical for them, paying the salary for the driver, the fuel expenses, then the bank EMI. Then they started driving the tractors themselves. Still, they could not fix the problem. What was the final solution? They started giving their lands in sharecropping to the Dalits. Not only that, their lands now Dalits are cultivating as sharecroppers. They would employ the same landlords to come and till their land using their tractors. So within a generation, what happened is the same landless agricultural labor, some of them could become sharecroppers and engage their farmer landlords to till their lands using their tractors. So that is the kind of social change happened. It's not some kind of a centrally sponsored scheme. This is not some kind of affirmative action. But nevertheless, this is the result of economic reforms. And the second is the entrepreneurs. Rohan, when we went into the field, our basic assumption was that these are the kids of officers. Since there are no government jobs, they might be coming into the entrepreneurship. Almost all the entrepreneurs we profiled in the Defining the Arts book, most of them did not have proper education. One. Most of them are first generation entrepreneurs. Almost all of them did not seek government help. They found some collateral, went to the bank, and put the collateral, and took the loan, and went and did their business, and they succeeded. It is possible there are so many other fields we did not study. So here also you don't really find any government intervention. So the point I'm conveying is, it is not always necessary that you need to have some kind of specialized programs, schemes to uplift the marginalized. Pure and simple good governance is enough. Famously, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, when he was Prime Minister, he said that administrative reforms are the best anti-poverty program you can think of. Making administration work, making police do their job will have far bigger impact on social change than any other targeted programs you can think of.
And some of the research also points, at least to me, jumped out as being important reminders to other people who are researching this space that it's not as simple as reducing things to numbers. We have to or the impact of, as you say, like, just the schemes that are directly focused on upliftment. We often miss out the impacts of other things. More recently, in a chapter called Reimagining Merit in India, Cognition and Affirmative Action, you again draw attention to some of these aspects which are not always captured in the way we think and talk about the upliftment. One thing that jumped out to me in the earlier paper in 2010 was the point of what food Dalits were eating, for example, as moving from high calorie content that was tended to be eaten by poorer households to things that might not be as nutritional for them, but in a way allowed them to buy status. And again, in the Reimagining Merit piece, the question being put forward is that alongside affirmative action, we need to think about the question of social cognition. Could you tell me a little bit about this?
Yeah, before I come to that, let me just add a point. It must go to Chandraban Prasad. The way he postulated it is, for Manu, that is the traditional Indian society, caste matters. There is no way you can change your status. Despite all your hard work and your success, your caste determines your place in society. But for the market, you can buy your status. Say now, market, I don't mean, say, urban areas, even rural, the villages are markets now. The impact of market is such that, for example, in a village, it doesn't really matter what is your caste, whether you are having an iPhone or some a cheaper Android phone is a status marker. So some of our work is also informed by this concern, the dichotomy between traditional society as stipulated by, say, Manusmriti, as opposed to the market, whose laws are stipulated much more in a rational way. So that is the point I want to highlight, because this is in a way central to most of the work we have done over the past 2 decades, and for that, Chandrabanji, he deserves the credit. And as to the social cognition, Rohan, I'll give you some anecdotal evidence, but I'm sure if not now, maybe after a decade or so, you will certainly find enough numbers to validate this. Those Dalits who moved to the Western countries, say United States, my contemporaries, who happened to marry here, then moved there, so their kids got born there, as when they were toddlers, they moved to the United States. So they grew just as Indians. And no, they attended the same regular schools like anybody else. They went on to colleges and universities and got their degrees. Some even ended up in very elite colleges and universities. They're absolutely fine. You don't really find much difference in terms of their academic accomplishments compared to other Indians in America or any Americans. So our stress on that in that paper about social cognition is, your merit is not just a product of your hard work and your genes or your DNA. Those could be factors. So my belief is, your merit is a function of your social cognition, how you are conditioned to think, how you understand your position in society, determine your efficiency levels or your cognition. Am I clear?
Yeah, there's a study that sort of brings this out very clearly. I can't remember by who here, but where Dalit students, when they were told to say out their full names.
Oh yes, Carla Hoff and Priyanka Pandey. They did that very similar paper. So this is a very good study. Actually, I should have mentioned it because it deserves all the credit. They went to a North Indian village, I think Uttar Pradesh. They went to a school. They gave a simple test to all students in the class, and they measured their performance. And Dalit students, it so happened, performed a bit better than the rest of the students. Now, the second part of the experiment was they asked each student to get up, mention their name and their father's name, and sit. After this exercise was over, they were again given a similar test. In the second test, the performance of Dalits literally plummeted. So the explanation was that by reciting their name and their father's name, they were reminded of their identity, which affected their performance. I 100% believe in that. We can design different kinds of tests and experiments to validate that. So, why this is important in the context of merit? Because time and typing, even the programs that were designed to help, like say affirmative action, the way you implement them, so I don't know, now things might have changed. For example, for my generation, you get into a college in the board, all the students were selected will be there in one column, the next column they mention SC student and SC students and OBC students. So time and time again, or suddenly in the middle of a class, the school clerk would come with the textbooks and say that, okay, these are the free copies for the scheduled class students and scheduled drive students. So you stand up and if you are a scheduled class, a scheduled drive, you get your copy. You could be happy, others could be jealous of you, but the fact remains that in a way, all these gestures of the government with very, very good intentions did a different kind of damage. The way you can help these marginalized communities is by either creating a completely neutral learning environment or to sufficiently to help them to process their own thinking about this. So that was our concern in that paper, in the meritocracy paper.
Yeah, and again, I see it as part of that broader trend to nuance our understanding of how, and by us, I mean often like in popular media, in the way that Indian discourse tackles some of these things. Another example is a shorter piece you wrote, I believe in the Hindu a little while ago, arguing that far from seeing it a certain way, that the Indian state should actually be quite proud that its policies have created a creamy layer among the most disadvantaged, and that just the way we talk about, for example, the creamy layer or successful Dalits, it ends up having a sort of backfiring or creating a new set of indicators in social cognition, as you mentioned in this paper.
Well, thank you very much for raising this point. So there's one narrow context. So my concern very narrowly was that when it came to the appointment of civil servants, the judiciary talks about creamy layer, meaning that those, especially in the context of OBCs actually, those whose parents' income is above a particular threshold, they are dismissed as creamy layer and they are not doing that job. So my point was and is that if you are using public employment as a poverty alleviation measure, fine, there's nothing wrong with that. Then you have to also remove creamy layer from the general category. Then why is it that the richest people can actually apply and get these jobs? Why are we using only this for the reserved categories? there's a different concern as such, which is, as such, we have caste differences which don't go away. In any particular value, you know your caste and you also know everybody else's caste. That certainly creates a particular dynamic. Now here, our system, which was designed in a very laudable way to help the victims of caste to get into these spaces, but at the same time, you are removing their best and the brightest, those who could access quality education, whose parents have sufficient resources to bring up their kids in a good environment. And by selecting candidates from these sections who happen to be from the poorest of the poor households, hence couldn't access proper education, you are putting these students, these candidates, in league of the creamy layer from the rest of the society. To begin with, which is wrong. Number two, the quota category officers, employees would not be performing their duties as well as the rest. So every generation, given the numbers, you keep on taking poor and marginalized candidates for reserved categories. And when it comes to the non-reserved categories, you are happy to take the privilege. I thought that is quite objectionable. It's still, like as I said, it's a very narrow concern. But when broader point is, Rohan, I'm old enough to remember that, people get such a kind of vicarious pleasure to say that we're not doing well. The whole world is collapsing, the twins are falling, nothing happened. I've been literally hearing, 3 decades of independence, we are 1, 2, 3. 4 decades of independence, we have this much poverty. 5 decades, now it's 7 decades, 75 years they're celebrating and say, nothing happened. So absolute nonsense. Indian state, with all its limitations and all its infirmities, incompetence, corruption, has delivered tremendous. Even while articulating the concerns of the Dalits and tribals, I would still say, yes, there are still problems, but let us not say that nothing happened. Because of economic reforms, millions of Dalits and tribals were lifted out of poverty. So, because if you are in the space talking about the issues of social justice and affirmative action, politics of quotas, legal litigation, there's a tendency to be very negative. Oh, India is our caste and nothing else is happening. We are to. I don't belong to that.
Right. Yeah, it's a good point to make, and I think it shows through also in some of the work that we've had a chance to talk about. Of course, we could spend all day, I think, digging into your whole body, your work. There's lots of fascinating material there, but we're coming up on the hour mark here. So maybe if I then narrow the scope, you mentioned things having changed over the years for the Indian state. Maybe if we look a little more closely at the academic world or the think tank world, that there is the contention for many that spaces like CPR, that think tanks tend to be elitist, to not also be open either to individuals from the low castes, from scheduled tribes and so on, or to not take seriously some of those the issues that matter. So I'd like to hear what you think about this general sense about the think tank world and spaces like CPR.
Well, in general, there is some merit in that point. Let's not forget, in my case, I wanted to join CPR because it's an elitist organization. For an individual like me from a mofussil town, coming to Delhi and trying to find my space, even to publish an op-ed, you send just your article to some newspaper without any affiliation, or you send it as a fellow at the Center for Policy Research. It makes all the difference. So people tend to come to CPR because it's an elite. I would say it is not automatically a kind of a disqualification or some kind of a pejorative identity. But what is a legitimate criticism is these elite spaces only worry about elite concerns. At least in case of CPR, that is not true. We were very, very well focused on matters of, say, administrative reforms, economic policies. But in the past decade also, we have been working on social justice issues. But these spaces are not sufficiently open to the subalterns, not just lower castes, say people from rural areas. Prima facie, even I accepted that, yes, the places like CPR should be doing more to make the place somewhat more representative of the country. But there are so many structural issues that is not happening. But I would say in the past 50 years, CPR has done enough. I wouldn't say enough, but has done a lot not to be a kind of elitist organization only worried about elite concerns and hiring only elite sections. So, for example, the work we have done here the past several years, conducting research methodology workshops. It's not just one or two. President Pratap and Yamini, most of our faculty were actively involved. The issue was, specifically, okay, this is a ICSSR funded project that we started, was that typically scheduled caste and scheduled tribe scholars tend to go to rural schools, non-English medium schools. So somehow they crawl their way up, go and do PhD somewhere, and thanks to the quota system, they get into universities as faculty. But their competence levels as researchers are not up to the mark. So is there any way we can have brief interventions to help them? We did 5 such workshops. Some of our assumptions were true. To a large extent, we tried to bridge that. Have we succeeded completely? No. We have done really honorable work. Most of those candidates, about 150 candidates who we trained here, gave us the feedback that they were happy with that, and many actually told me that because of our workshops, they could finish their PhDs so well. And who knows, in future, some of them may end up being the faculty at CPR. But again, back to your question, yes, it's not easy for places like CPR to simply ignore this criticism that they are too elitist and they are not sufficiently open to get the Mufsil India into these spaces.
Maybe then, if I can flip the question as we come into our final sort of questions on this interview, if you were, as you are meeting these younger scholars in these workshops, if they were to ask you for advice about coming into the policy space, not necessarily about specific areas that they should work on, but more lenses or approaches they should take, what advice would you have for younger scholars?
Well, I wouldn't advise whether they should get into policy or not. But what I would advise is focus on your skill set. Brush up your language, especially English language. Probably much of our work in future we might do it our own language. But still, I would insist that English matters, it will continue to matter, because most of the knowledge of the world is recorded in that one particular language, much more than any other language. And the other side, almost all our Indian languages do not have even a rudimentary undergraduate level knowledge in their languages. You cannot do even a BA in political science with only books from, say, Hindi or Gujarati or Telugu language. So focus always on English, read widely. As and when an opportunity comes, just grab it. Be open, flexible. That's what I would say to young men or young women who come my way.
Um, one of our standard questions for every interviewee is about misconceptions. Are there misconceptions about either your areas of research, whether that's on the national security side or on the social justice side, or about your methods and approaches that you think are quite standard that people keep getting wrong about your work, whether it's in the media, whether it's from students or the lay public or even fellow scholars? Are there things that you think you see yourself having to correct people all the time about?
Well, the broader issue is in most social sciences. Social sciences are subject to areas. They are not object to, like, say, physics or chemistry. Social sciences are all about people and their sentiments, their views. Despite that, we still insist on some method, some acceptable way of validating a point. But what usually happens in these areas is, in sciences, you come up with a hypothesis and test it. Either you validate it or invalidate it. Go to the next one. In social sciences, well, the biggest problem I have noticed, probably I'm also not really immune to that, is that you come with your thesis and try to raise a hypothesis that would really prove your thesis, which is your own prejudice. Example. Why is it that almost 99.9% of the people who support, say, affirmative action happen to be the beneficiaries? Why is it that almost the same kind of percentage of people who oppose happen to be the non-reserved categories? Similarly, you go to a kind of foreign policy seminar, people come and give their own country's viewpoint and insist that is the right point. Sometimes I would say, yes, good or bad is your country approach is fine. But good or bad is my society, or good or bad my caste or my community, that may not be really good. I would really ask young scholars to be very, very tough when it comes to designing their own questions first. Are you already concluding based on your own preferences and your own prejudices, and then doing the research and in a way validating those prejudices which don't really have any rational basis? I think this happens all the time. As I said, I'm not immune to that, but at least you should keep that in mind. The social cognition piece I really enjoyed because in addition to caste and social justice, I could just dip my toes into cognitive dimensions of social existence. How much our cognition plays a role in what we do or how we think, how we react, which is a huge field, which is very technical. I don't have any academic grounding in that, but thanks to my friends and collaborators, Devesh and Chandravan, we did that paper. I really enjoyed doing that paper because if anybody reading it, especially a young scholar, can really take it forward. Because a lot need to be done in terms of cognition part of it, which is a kind of neglected dimension.
Absolutely, and we'll link to that in the show notes. And so then, sorry, the final question then, if you had to pick out three works or scholars or so on that have influenced you over the years, what would you point to?
Well, first one is, of course, Dr. Ambedkar. I already mentioned those three major works of him. And in a very, I wouldn't say influences, but I'm still fascinated by two authors, H.L. Mencken and G.K. Chesterton. Their style I so admire, and at the same time, there's no way anybody can emulate them, but they still stimulate me. Reading them is a pleasure, and I would highly recommend anyone who is interested in improving their language or their communication skills. I would say just a turn and Rachel Mengen.
Thank you for listening to CPR Perspectives. Subscribe to this podcast feed for future interviews, and you can also sign up to our newsletter, which will be linked in the show notes. For more information on CPR's work, you can follow the Centre on Twitter at CPR_India and log on to the website at www.cprindia.org. I'm at Rohan V on Twitter, and you can also read my newsletter India Inside Out on Indian politics, foreign policy and history at rohanvenkat.substack.com.